so much. It's been, as I said before, my pleasure to work with the Foundation for Democratic Initiatives, and for many years, which is a great member of SALOX, and our best partner that we could wish for in Ukraine, and that is really a great thing for us in any case, in order to establish a good cooperation between Europe, to help to help the process of establishing good cooperation between Europe and Ukraine. Of course, when I say Europe, I mean EU, because Ukraine is of course European. This is no question. Let me first explain very quickly what SALOX is. SALOX is a European political foundation. It's registered as such with the Authority for European Parties and Foundations. It's been around since 2010, and we are the foundation of the European Christian Political Movement, which is a European political party. So then basically these are umbrellas at the European level for national political parties. We're member parties of that structure. But we are its think tank, political foundation. We do a little bit more than that. It's not just that we organize events and do publications, which we do, but we also do some advocacy. And one of the things we do is really the networking, bringing people together who are of the same mind with regard to the future of our continent. And of course, this is also very much interrelated between us, Europe, and the world directly around us. So we have also been very busy with the Middle East, especially Iraq and Syria. So that having said, I prepared a presentation that is very much based on the situation in Europe, and meaning the EU. So if there is elements in it that you basically feel that it's not applicable for your situation, I apologize for that, because with regard to the corona crisis, it's very hard to really feel how it is in countries as Ukraine from here. And obviously, due to the whole travel ban, it's not been possible either to feel how you experienced the situation. And what I will do is not go into details of policy, but more slightly have a more philosophical, but also more, existential approach to this subject. And thanks to the work of Yuri, my presentation has been translated in Ukrainian, and please keep in mind it is written from a more Western European perspective, and hopefully there is something in it that is valuable for you too. I make a reference to Ukraine as well, but I hope it makes sense. I will now into the slideshow from beginning. I said. So that's from beginning. As you can see, this is our logo, and if you want to know more about our organization, you can go to our website. So let me begin to start with simply a personal note on how things went down here in the Netherlands, where I live. Basically, what we saw, actually, people like me were working at the international level already knew, is that obviously also in the Netherlands, the government acted too late, and that exacerbated the problems. The intelligence coming from the intel community was basically discarded, and the information from the WHO was taken as the lead, and it has led to a situation in which basically many of our economies went into a lockdown. Now, one can say that this is a bad thing. And yes, it is a bad thing. I mean, we lost a lot of people, and many people died, many people went to hospitals and so on, and many people still experience the bad consequences of the coronavirus. And this has not to be disregarded in any way. So while we, of course, empathize fully and sympathize fully with the victims of this situation, we also can see perhaps some positives coming from this, that we can learn from this, that because the mistake was made not to listen in time to the warnings that were there, we ended up in a situation that at the same time exposed a lot of issues in our society that we would have to deal with anyway at some point, and we're now forced to deal with regardless. So I now continue with the actual presentation, and this is written from a bit from the perspective slightly of 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and of course things are already changing a bit, but I will still stick to the text also because it's how it's been translated in Ukrainian. So what can I say? Even if things have changed a little bit, we are already leaving lockdown in a way. We all know that everything is really different now. I don't know how it is with you, but it's already becoming a bit hard to imagine, like you remember, but do you still feel how it was in normal times? I'm one of these people, I can adapt relatively quickly to a new situation. And when I'm in that new situation, I'm like, okay, this is the new normal, as they call it. But the impact of this crisis digs really deep. It goes down to our existential level because it has to deal with health. This crisis is existential at the human level, how we are vulnerable as human beings. And therefore also at the level of our economic and political philosophies and systems. And what we are experiencing with this corona crisis is so multifaceted, it shakes up literally everything in our societies. And from there, we can draw some conclusions or steps, basically said, not conclusions, steps. So first of all, we're all fragile humans with the same human dignity. Nobody can pretend to be invincible in face of this crisis. We had a lot, especially this neoliberal idea of the invincible, autonomous individual, who can do everything on its own. Nobody can pretend to be that. Not when you can be, struck with corona crisis and end up in hospital or worse. This epidemic has ended the illusion of the strong autonomous individual. We are vulnerable human beings who often try to pretend otherwise, but cannot do so this time. We are interdependent. We are dependent from each other. As we are rediscovering our common vulnerability, we discover as well that we depend on a shared notion of common human dignity. And in fact, there's an appeal on that. You have to help us. We are your fellow human beings. This is the cry, for example, from Southern Europe to Northern Europe, and it is a valid cry, because it says that we share a common human dignity. And when we think about it, what else can we fall back on if we are depending also inside our countries on the care by other people. We cannot fall back on the notion of the autonomous individual. We can only fall back on our common human dignity. That is the bedrock we can fall back on. If that's not there, there's only a chasm. Now from there we can go to the next, and it's a bit more complicated, but it is a logical step from the previous. Family and cooperation instead of individualistic competition. So the conclusion of the previous slide leaves no other choice than to reevaluate all those ideas and systems that are based on the idea of individualistic competition, of the strong and the able. When push comes to shove, and it really, matters, we appear in need of family and cooperation instead, and not just individualistic competition. It's not working. In a time of corona crisis, you can say, oh, I'm for individualistic competition, but it doesn't make any sense in this situation. It is clear now that the existence of family and cooperation, when we analyze it, was in fact always the silent guarantee and social basis in society that enables, in turn, the competition of the stronger and able. Think about the fact that all the schools were suddenly closed, in the Netherlands at least. And so suddenly we discovered that actually, oh, we have to take care for the children and so on. And because the children are at home, and oh, now the man, they cannot go to work because somebody has to take care of the children. So the fact that we had a system there enabled actually the competition, the people going to work in a competitive market. But actually the family is the social guarantee, is the silent guarantee and social basis of society. And the situation that we are in is also revealing that markets and competition depend on a functional government and on the caring side of our societies. We need healthcare. We need a government that can step in times of crisis. And it needs to be a functional government in this situation. Much of the economy simply cannot function if education and daycare are no longer there. The economy cannot function if there is no inclusive healthcare. If basically healthcare is only for the strong and powerful, then a lot of the people who are actually doing the work cannot work anymore. If you have a pandemic, you need a strong and inclusive healthcare. The economy cannot function separately from society. In a pandemic, it becomes clear that our almost artificial idea of economy is really not making much sense. You cannot separate economy from society, from culture. This was always true, and we have always emphasized this, but this truth was not always experienced sufficiently, and this is now coming to light. And the question is, will this experience change this now? Now we have experienced the real reality instead of the illusion of autonomous individual and competition with our society. Do we realize where we are, basically? Or who we are and what we need, what we actually need. Now then, when it comes to that, there is a need to fundamentally adjust our economy towards the real needs. We're all suddenly woke up to who essential workers are. I don't know how it was in Ukraine, but in the Netherlands, we certainly had this idea of essential workers. And these essential workers were not the CEOs, were not the people who were working, you know, on the stock markets, were not the managers. No, the essential workers are nurses, doctors, truckers, cashiers, box fillers in supermarkets, couriers who deliver packages, and teachers. Those are the essential workers. So our economy is ultimately about sustaining life and not about acquiring wealth. And therefore our economy is deeply relational and depending on those who are prepared to serve, like in healthcare or in education. So this situation has demonstrated that the financial streams are not there where they should be if we consider the real needs and where the real supply and demand are, because our actual needs and our actually, you know, existential demands are care, are food, are people, you know, who do the actual work in the supermarkets and so on. Of course, we need, you know, the whole infrastructure behind that. This is not a question. But at the same time, it reveals that, for example, payment, financial streams, rewards are not going to insufficient ways to the people who we most depend on when it really matters. So whatever the outcome of this crisis, we are in this together, and the financial sector, for example, will need to contribute to the solution instead of continuation of the extraction of finances from the real economy. This is at least experience in a big debate and realization in our political reality. And perhaps in Ukraine, I made a reference there, but I'm not sure if I'm making the right call here, but I share this thought with you. And correct me if I'm wrong. In Ukraine, perhaps there is a need for more resistance in society against the oligarchs. I hope that makes sense for you. So then a more, you know, cultural, existential notions to close with. So you cannot shout facts away. So this crisis also made obvious that it is not possible to shout reality away. And what we have seen in terms of leadership, when I see to Bolsonaro or Trump or Johnson, they also always posed as the macho guy, you know, that solves the problems by being very macho. It doesn't work. Johnson ended up in hospital. We have explosion of corona crisis in the US, and I cannot even start to talk about Brazil. Posing as a macho strong guy will not change the reality. And this is something that is perhaps typical for the Western European context. I must say that the countries in Europe that have been most successful in combating the corona crisis were all Central European countries. And Western Europe should learn a lesson from that in terms of humility and understanding that other people also have good ideas. So that is something we should take as a lesson. But coming back to this attitude of macho man, so to say, at the end of the day, we need scientific research and evidence-based rational solutions. Feelings cannot replace facts, and that given does, however, not end the debate on science, values, and society. And we have seen in the Netherlands a huge debate on the balance between, you know, the medical scientists and everything else that is happening in society. What is the right balance between the two? And this is still going on. So I'm going to my last two slides. I hope I'm still, oh, this is, No, I'm not sure because I'm experiencing a little technical problem. Wait a sec. I don't know what's happening. Moment. Right. So I think we should be there. Yeah. I'm sorry for the confusion. I don't know what is happening here. I cannot get the right slide on my screen here. So I will do it slightly different. If you give me a moment, I don't know what is technically going on, but I believe this is the slide that I should have now. We are all in this together. I don't know why it is not popping up on my bigger screen, but this is the actual slide that I wanted to show. So I hope that otherwise we can always share it later on. We're all in this together. This has been communicated so often these last months that it is impossible to ignore it. Well, if that is true, if we are indeed all in this together, then I draw the following conclusion for the EU audience: then it matters what happens outside our national and EU borders. It affects us all, and in return, it affects them. So we have always often worked at the point where the issues begin, at the source of issues that are often not in Europe, but outside Europe. And in that regard, we also have learned that, again, with this crisis, we need international solidarity, especially with people and communities who are threatened and oppressed. We have to resist authoritarian regimes like Russia, China, and so on. And by doing so, we recognize our common human dignity. If people outside Europe can enjoy their fundamental freedoms, it helps us. It is key in solving problems of international level. Authoritarian regimes, as we can see now, are not part of the solution, but cause of the problems. This is why we need the EU, and at the same time, the EU needs to find a new balance and needs reform. So I would like to go to the last slide. I don't know if I think this is, then again, if the title reads Manners Matter, Values Are Essential, is that correct, Yuri? Can you, if this is the right end slide, Manners Matter, Values Are Essential, right?
No.
Oh, again, it's just, I don't know what the problem is here, but this is at least the right one.
Yeah, this is the one.
Well, I don't know why the slide is not going to the screen, but at least you can see it here. This is my last slide. But most of us are more or less conservatives in some degree. And people who agree with us in terms of cultural conservatism and support our values have often been derided for their old-fashioned idea that manners matter, that we need to behave in a certain way towards each other with respect. And now we discover that actually that saves lives, because we need to take each other into account. There's an overarching call by every European government, at least, that we should take care for one another and behave ourselves responsibly. Well, this is also where I want to finalize with this truth again, points again to this deeper reality of our shared human dignity, and that our societies actually depend on that shared human dignity. So that is what I had to say. I hope it made some sense. I will stop the share screen. Sorry for the technical issue. I don't know why there was an issue, but I hope I managed it all right. And I hope that the other screens were in conjunction with the Ukrainian. That was good, because I have to admit I cannot read anything of it. So okay. I'm hoping and guessing that it was more or less correct.
And Yongs, we have now the position of the discussion, and the question is, we are not a socialist. Yeah, we are not proposing total collectivism. We are proposing solidarity. This is kind of the intermediate way. And where is the margins of individual freedom, and where is the margin of the collective behavior? This is the question. Yes, if we are talking about the solidarity, where is the margin of this solidarity in question of collectivism? Do we need more collectivism, but how much? This is the question.
See, here's the thing. There's a way of thinking within Salux that we call relational thinking. You can find more about it on our website. So the question is, I would turn the question a bit around. When do you need collectivism? When there is not enough solidarity. So collectivism is a need basically based on the lack of, society helping each other. Of course, you need government to provide infrastructure for, solidarity in a way, and also to see to make solidarity at a national level possible, because of course we cannot, individually help each other. But individually help everybody. We can individually help each other, but not individually help everybody. Now, collectivism is for me something else. Now let me explain this from the perspective of democracy. So in the Netherlands, we have a parliament. In our elections, in our parliamentary elections, we have no 5% hurdle. Now that means that when people vote, almost all the votes will result in seats, which means automatically that we have a turnout of, almost of 85% or something, I believe. And perhaps a bit higher, sometimes a bit lower, when it comes to national parliamentary elections. It means that people have a high sense of co-ownership of the whole, so to say. Now, for me, that is something fundamentally different from collectivism. So there is a difference between, co-ownership and collectivism. So there I would make an important distinction. It seems to be a nuance, but for me, the feel of collectivism is a more, top-down thing. And in some countries, you can see that, and that is mostly due to the lack of appropriate democracy and really proportional representation. And people feel government as a collectivist thing in which they are forced to be part of. Now, of course, there is always a degree of force coming from the government, but if you at the same time have a sense of co-ownership of the government, it's kind of balanced. So I think that democracy here plays a huge part.
It's kind of that middle way, yes?
Yes. But I also want to say something else. When it comes to solidarity, when it comes to make a distinction with collectivism. I think it is very important to see the role and strengthen the role of the regional and the local level, wherever that is practically possible. Of course, I mean, the province cannot do foreign affairs. This to make a strange example, but you get the point. But where it is possible and appropriate to move, decision making on issues that matters for people to the level that they can have access to what's happening, can co-decide to what's happening and have at least access to the people who are making the decisions, actual decisions. It's also incredibly important that they can share their concerns, that they can share, their issues. Then the collectivist, meaning the feeling of forced collectivism, will reduce significantly.
Thank you, Yongs. Then I have a possibility to address the same question to Yongs. The question is, can you hear me?
Yes.
Valery asked your position about the situation that governments hurt individual freedom when they are improved very hard quarantine, very hard restriction in time of the pandemia. How do you see this? Very shortly, in 1 minute. Is it okay, or this quarantine and restriction are good or bad?
Well, as I said before, in the Netherlands, this was not so strict as in some other countries. So it's a bit difficult for me to give an overall judgment. But one has to think about this. If some governments would not have imposed these quarantines, a lot of more people would have died than already have died, with enormous consequences for their families and so on. At the same time, these hard lockdown also had bad consequences for the people for many people who experience that. It is a very tough call, and there is not a simplistic yes, no, good, bad answer to that. I would say it is important that a government, when it does that, has the feeling and sufficient inclusion of all the democratic actors of society in making such decisions, because then it is not simply imposed collectivist, in curbing of individual freedoms. It is also something that people experience and feel as shared responsibility. And there's the difference again between, solidarity and collectivism.